Blimey. Ooh, this is one hell of a jam jar you got here.
Every morning, the House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael Flores, your host and the curator of the House of Mystery. And in the basement, listening to music from his boombox. This is the 80s. Somehow we've traveled back in time. Time is relative in the House of Mystery, right?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
So we still have a lot of 80s garb around, and you have a boombox.
Yes.
And you're enjoying some old-fashioned punk rock.
It's a blaster box.
While you're killing fools in the basement. Trolls. Trolls are in the basement.
We're introducing the trolls to some ghosts that have been held back for far too long.
I don't know what that means, but okay. All right. So, David, in this episode, we are going to continue our discussion on Ram V's The Swamp Thing, which was extended from its original series order, which was 10 issues.
Yes.
And if you include the 2021 Future State Swamp Thing title, which led into the Swamp Thing, we had another 12 issues. So technically, Ram V's story up to this point is comprised of 12 issues.
12 issues.
And for the most part, it's been an exceptional run.
It's been amazing. It's to the point that basically it rivals a lot of writing on television. That's why I think it's hilarious that they if you look at the cover for issue 11, where they call it season 2, and I'm really happy with a lot of like the positive word that's going around for Ram V, because I think that Ram V is gearing up to be probably the lead writer for DC, at least being one of the best of writers in DC.
That I'll agree with you. I don't think he'll be one of the lead writers just because I don't feel like he has a lot of mainstream appeal. I'm just being honest. And I'll get into
he doesn't have Taylor. The Taylor magic.
That's what I'm not saying he can't make a successful mainstream hit, because he has. Swamp Thing is a mainstream success. We'll get into that in a second. I want to clue some potential David, I am speaking in tongues for some reason. I don't know what just happened.
I brought up the T word.
You know what? That's what it was. I was trying to exorcise the demons from my body. How dare you bring up Tom Taylor? Okay, so if you're a new listener and you have found our show, I welcome you to the House of Mystery. This is a John Constantine and Friends show. As I had said at the top of the show, it's a Constantine-centric show. So we focus, for the most part, I'd say a good 80, 90%, we focus on Constantine-centric storylines and news, but we leave that 10 to 15% open for other things. And so far over the last year and a half, that other 10 to 15% has been filled with Swamp Thing.
Yes.
And Swamp Thing is probably my second favorite character in the world of the darker side of DC, I would say. So that's probably why we're doing it. Also, Ram V has been given the reins over the last year and a half to flesh out the world of Swamp Thing, and he is an exceptional writer. And that's probably another reason why I've now gravitated back to my old reading habits of picking up Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
Because I haven't read Swamp Thing really since the 90s until recently. And now I've gone back and read some of the newer stuff, but I felt like, the whole New 52 stuff wasn't that great.
Well, it was because a lot of during the New 52, they tried to make Swamp Thing part of the Capes. They tried to actually put him in the echelon of like Superman, the Trinity, and all of them. And really good Swamp Thing stories are really difficult to write for characters who have capes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with stories about elementals and the natural world and really out there concepts and ideas, especially I'm sure we're going to be talking about for these particularly 3 issues, it's very hard to contextualize that towards like characters like Superman, who it's with characters who basically can solve a problem with their sheer power and sheer strength.
And also, just from a literary standpoint, Swamp Thing, for the most part, has always been designed to be a metaphor.
Yes.
As a way to dissect environmental issues in society. And when you rip them from those aspects, those roots, and you put them into the world of just fun escapism, it just doesn't work sometimes. Sure, it may introduce Swamp Thing to new readers, and I understand why they do that. But for the most part, Swamp Thing is never used appropriately in these Cape stories.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he hasn't been used well. I'm just saying for the most part. And that's why I just don't really gravitate to those types of stories. But Ram V has reminded me why. David, why? And just to go with what you were saying a few moments ago, Ram V is following in the footsteps of some of the comic book greats. I will say that, with his skill to reify the natural poetics of his writing style, which has worked so well within the wheelhouse of Swamp Thing. This is a character, as I had just said, was designed as a metaphor of ecological activism.
Yes.
And Ram V doesn't shy away from the metaphor. He embraces it, and it works so well with his writing style.
And not only does he embrace it, but he actually adds more mythos to it. You know, he just doesn't stick to the lane. He actually starts kind of pushing the boundaries of it. And basically taking the ideas that were set by like writers like Alan Moore and
the greats,
Neil Gaiman in the past, and especially in
Warren Ellis.
Yep. And taking their original concepts of the ideas that Swamp Thing was introducing to the DC landscape and adding more boundaries to it and showing that basically, hey, there's more to it than just basically it's nature versus us. It's the thing that I've really been enjoying about Ram V. He has made this really wide universe of like this mythos of Swamp Thing and kind of personalized it.
Yep.
And turned it inward.
Yep.
Where now you're like looking at concepts like what you would see in Doom Patrol, where it's not just about the superheroes, it's about what's inside them and the ideas, the themes, the concepts.
David, you're saying a lot of complicated things to just say substance.
There you go. That's the word. Substance. It's adding substance.
And listen,
to it.
I do this. I'm not saying you shouldn't use all those words, but I'm trying to simplify it down and be, cynical. Like,
yes,
you're talking about substance, David. He actually uses substance in his stories. And as I mentioned, the series that Ram V has been writing was extended by 6 issues, making a grand total of 16 issues plus the 2 future state issues. And that brings us to this episode's agenda for the House of Mystery. We are going to take a look at issues 11, 12, and 13, which encompass the storyline titled Jericho's Rose, parts 1 through 3. Now, I have gone back and forth, David, over the last several weeks, trying to decide whether or not we do individual discussions because there's so much in each issue. And I figured, you know what? We're so far behind because of you getting hospitalized, me getting COVID, you getting COVID. And because of that, we're about 3 months behind when it comes to our scheduling.
Oh, yeah.
And if we were to now break down each individual issue, we would be pushed even further back. So we had to make a decision. And in this discussion, we're going to focus on the highlights, the things that really work over the course of the last 3, or I should say issues 11, 12, and 13. And dissecting the aspects that the story was really about, the foundational elements and what it does for the cosmology of DC, because it does a lot.
Yes.
It does a lot. So the official synopsis: by popular demand, the Swamp Thing has returned and is extending his roots into Season 2. The climatic battle between Levi and his brother Jacob led to events that left the Swamp Thing broken up, literally. Now, with Levi fractured and on the edge of oblivion, an unlikely ally has entered the fray to piece him back together again. Tifa Holland.
Yes.
Daughter of the original Swamp Thing.
And technically the daughter of a certain someone that we love and know.
Of course, her biological father is Constantine.
Yes.
So we'll get into that because it's an interesting dynamic there.
The interesting is a one way to put it.
Yeah, it's you know what? Swampy got cuckolded. And he was down with it.
But here was the thing. Did Swamp Thing get cuckolded? Because when you read it, Mike, and
it's a little bit of both.
It's a little bit of both.
Constantine was also cuckolded. But also, at the end of the day, it's not a bad deal if you're Constantine. And, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll
exactly.
get into it.
Because it is a fun story.
Yeah, sexually. All right, so these issues 11, 12, and 13, they do a lot of interesting things. There's a continuation of things from before, of course, the aftermath of Prescott Industries' actions, the return of the Pale Wanderer, which is bastardized into an abomination and becomes the Pale Pilgrim, which still sticking to those Western themes. I'm down with that. Thus ushering in the creation of the Parliament of Gears.
Yes.
Which is a metaphor for industry and capitalism run amok.
God, dude, it is such an awesome idea.
It really is. Ranvi also introduces, or I should say reintroduces, Teffa Holland into modern DC continuity. She has some interesting links to Constantine. And Jack Hawksmoor. Is that how you say his name?
Hawksmoor, which for me was a complete surprise. And
Same.
I was
I'm
really
familiar
happy.
with him. Yeah.
I was really happy they brought that character into this particular title.
Yeah, he's a former character that was part of the Stormwatch IP,
Yes.
which was published, I believe, originally under Image/Wildstorm, the Wildstorm imprint, correct?
Yeah.
And was later sold to DC Comics. I want to say 1999. It was right. I believe it was right.
Yeah,
at the cusp of the millennium, right?
Cusp of the millennium, and basically, like Jack was actually the leader, or kind of like the main character of the title, one of the main characters of it. And some of the stories, Wildstorm was one of the things that kind of flew under the radar when it came to comics, like in the middle 2000s.
Readership, right? But quality-wise,
it was
had some good stories. Yeah.
Warren Ellis wrote a couple of Wildstorm stories.
Well, wasn't it Jim Lee and Warren Ellis?
Jim Lee too. Yeah. And like the fact that basically I kind of like am excited because of the fact that Ram V brought in a character that fits power-wise perfectly in the type of stories that he's telling.
It makes perfect sense.
Because Jack is the king of the city.
It makes perfect sense.
And when for people out there who are not familiar with Jack's powers, the only way he can derive his powers is if he's in the middle of a city, barefoot, and his body has to actually talk to the city,
and he becomes the embodiment
and the
city.
Avatar of the city that he's in.
Avatar is the key word there, because that's going to be one of our focus of discussions here. So because this really, issues 11 through 13 was really about recontextualizing, reworking some of the things within the DC world when it comes, or how it pertains to Swamp Thing. And a lot of it revolves around new iterations of avatars
and stuff like that. And Jack is the perfect person for power-wise to fit in a story like this.
I'm surprised someone hasn't thought of it sooner, because it just works. It makes perfect sense in the world of Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
All right. So these issues are highly philosophical, bleeding into areas of the metaphysical. In fact, I'd say the foundation of the series as a whole has been built on the metaphysical notion of nature versus humanity, as well as the concept of epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowledge or the theory of knowledge. It's the knowledge of knowledge, Dave. It sounds really silly, but that is what it is, essentially.
Yeah.
All of which at times can lean into the abstract. Like, for example, epistemology looks to circumvent such things by analyzing the scope and validity of such methods of theory. Ram V uses the Pale Wanderer as a writing device to give answers to the reasons behind problems in society.
Yes.
And how a close examination of our consumerist ways and the manipulative tactics of industry seek new modes of or methods to get us to consume more and more.
Yes.
And that is at the heart of these issues here. It is an indictment of unbridled capitalism.
Yes. It takes the trope of the, usually when you see like an environmentalist story, they try to actually make the idea of industry villainous.
Right.
Right? Well, Ram V basically said, you know what? I'm not just going to just take the concept. I'm going to personify industry and make it the main villain. And it works because like when you look at Prescott and see what he gets turned into, it makes complete sense that basically, yeah, the concept of industry is partial unbridled greed.
Yeah. Yeah, greed for sure.
And basically, it's not about basically making anyone better. It's just basically consumption. It's just basically taking what's there and just for taking sake.
And it just shows that we're all victims of consumption and greed from industry.
Greed from industry.
It's a really interesting way, and it's an interesting way to continue the idea of eco activism, which is at Swamp Thing's core. I mean, that is what Swamp Thing was built for the most part,
But look,
from the
dude,
very beginning. And the fact that Ram V is finding new ways to reinvent that activism. In fact, I'd say in many ways, not only is he doing that, but Ram V is using everything that makes sense to Swamp Thing to flesh out the cosmology further with such things as the Parliament of Gears, which
dude.
you were getting into.
That was cool that they brought that up.
He is also creating this vast metaphor that serves as I said, an indictment of not just capitalism, but greed, the greed of capitalism and what it does to us as humans, but more importantly for this story, the environment.
Yes.
To me, this shows the strength of his writing style and the understanding of Swamp Thing as an IP. And I know that sounds a little silly, David. Well, he's writing Swamp Thing, so he should understand the character. But believe it or not, David, there's a lot of writers who are hired to write for certain IPs that
Yes.
probably shouldn't be writing for that IP because they don't know
easily.
anything about that character. They just know the basics. They don't actually know the genetic profile of these characters and what they were designed for and what some of the best stories say, what they're trying to say with these characters. Whereas Ram V, I mean, his writing style just works so well with the Swamp Thing IP. I mean, taking concepts that align with, and this is the stuff I'm really anxious to hear your thoughts on. Taking concepts that align with nature, such as the green, the red, and even the rot, and positioning them in opposition to the unnatural industry and all its abominations that's left in the wake of such an abomination. Consumption is framed as a disease, essentially.
Yes.
This entire thing is then paired with Ram's original concept from the first half of his Swamp Thing run, which is ideas. If we had to pinpoint one continuous narrative thread from the very beginning of Ram's Swamp Thing storyline, it is the existential and overt threat and danger of ideas.
Yeah. Of ideas taking shape.
Yeah.
And that's how, you know, in the story in the first season, Jacob's hate of his brother is what was poisoning the green. And it wasn't just basically, you know, some magic that he did. No, it was the personification of his idea of hate that poisoned the green. And then I thought that from the quote unquote first season of Swamp Thing, that story that Ram V was telling was genius, especially when you take a look back now and you see the beginning of the story with the desert wanderer. And we were like, oh, it's the rot. That guy had to be part of the rot. And you find out, especially in this episode, no. The rot had nothing to do with that character, because that character, the what we see in issue 11 is all based on greed, unwanted greed.
Right.
The rot was just natural death. Just that was it. There was nothing
It's
natural.
still a part.
There was nothing natural of him.
I'm glad you stressed that, because that's the difference. Because even though the rot has always been used as, let's say,
villain.
the villain side of the Swamp Thing stories, it's still a part of nature. It's natural.
It's natural.
The rot, death and disease. That's natural. It's
That's
part of the
natural.
process of living and life and death.
But you look like
you throw in the unnatural aspects of the industry. That's the true villain right there.
And
at least
especially
in the world of Swamp Thing.
And especially when you throw into the fact of how he was created with Woodrow's, like, remember Woodrow
He's such an asshole.
going on about how we're on the cusp of like a scientific discovery.
I just love how Ram V is writing him, because he doesn't say anything, but then he has Mike Perkins just draw him smiling in the background. Like this is all part of his plan to do this. Like is he just chaos at this point? Is that what Woodrow is?
Yeah, that's what he is. And Woodrow is the unnatural element in the green because he forced his way into the green.
He wasn't chosen, right?
He wasn't chosen.
Yeah.
That's why, like, I thought it was genius, because when you actually look at who's causing all this, now the sides start making sense.
Yeah.
Because in the very beginning, you're wondering, why is Woodrow here? Now it makes sense because he's representing the unnatural side that's coming in.
He's Dr. Frankenstein.
He's Dr. Frankenstein.
How awesome is that?
And like my favorite thing that they did is there's a part when Woodrow is going on and on about how they're what they're doing in the procedure to create this. I forgot what the character's name, but Prescott. Mm-hmm. What they end up doing to Prescott, and they made him a conduit. And Woodrow goes on like 5 panels in these like really, really thick bubbles. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of like Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Like tempting fate and tempting, the natural order, throwing, his fists up at God because he wants to be God. Mm-hmm. And
I like it, David, because, and this goes against some of the naysayers out there, some of the Swamp Thing babies that are saying that Ram V is doing everything wrong and that he's changing things too much. But he's actually paying honor and tribute to it. He's just doing his own story, because the fact that he even has Woodrow in the storyline, and he's still, for all intents and purposes, he may not be the focal point as a villain, but he is the one fucking around with things. He's the one who created the Parliament of Years, essentially.
And then this is the part that I found in my notes that I basically wrote. It's the lines where he says, "I want you all to understand we are functioning here at the borders of known science, where what we know to be true or possible is less important than what we believe we can accomplish." And then he basically tells all the doctors, savor the moment. And I'm like going, that is an industrial way of thinking. He's thinking the unnatural way. Mm. He's fighting against nature. He doesn't want to listen to the rules. No. I make my own rules.
Yeah. It's very interesting how he's intertwining all these things.
And then think about this, Mike, because we read where this leads to. And especially with the, I think it was Future's End. Was it Future's End?
Future State.
Future State. We know Woodrow's fate. Think about how he ends up.
It's also, we're not sure though, right? Isn't Future State supposed to be a possible future?
Yes. But if you think about it, Woodrow in this panel, and then Woodrow in the end when he skinned himself and grafted like unknown things onto himself, it makes complete sense now. What Woodrow became.
Yeah. I think that's one of the cooler things about Future State, is that because it's almost like a warning. What a way to start your series run, with a future that we're going to work towards that may or may not come about. What an interesting way to create suspense. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, at least in comic books. Have you?
No.
Where they kind of tell you this is how it ends, potentially, and now we're going to work towards that possibility. Or something might happen where, future veers another way.
It adds that tension that basically we as the readers like going, we now don't want that future happening. So while we're reading this, we're like going, okay, how are they going to stop it?
I'm okay with humanity being wiped out. I'm okay with that, David. It's time. It's time for us.
You want to fulfill Teffy's destiny, I see.
Yeah, see, that's another thing. Like we talk about like this optimism, like, oh, humanity. And I understand that's a part of Swamp Thing's story to first view humanity through a pessimistic lens, but then at the end of that, you find a new way of looking at humanity as more hope. Like there's a hope there. We make the same mistakes over and over and over, but there's still that hope that we will eventually find what's pure and good in us, because there is that in all of us, but we have to bring it out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, fuck that. That doesn't, like, listen, there's only so many times someone can keep making the same mistake before we're just fucked. That person is just fucked up. And if you keep giving him the opportunity and he keeps making the same bad decisions, that's just the decision he's going to make for all eternity.
So you'd be looking at Swamp Thing about that one part in I think it was issue 13 where they were talking about the strength of humanity is are willing to choose.
Yeah, fuck that. The strength of humanity is their death. We are the biggest disease on this planet. We don't exist. Every when you remove a life from the circle of life, usually there's something that goes wrong within the environment. Okay, if humans were removed, the earth would thrive. That is true.
We
saw it during the coronavirus.
We did. Yes, we did.
We were locked in our homes for 2 weeks, and the repair to the ocean, as it was reported, was phenomenal. They're like, okay, wait a second. We had reports saying at one point that in order to repair certain damage in our environment, it would take years and years and years and years to fix these things, and yet you remove humanity's footprint, and in a matter of weeks, the problems start reversing.
Yeah.
If we haven't seen a better example of how shitty we are,
how we're a parasite,
yeah, then you never will see a better example, and you just don't want to. You're closing your eyes to the reality that we are horrible.
Exactly.
All right, let's get back on track. So keeping it on in similar talking fashion here, similar concepts, let's continue our discussion of Jack Hawksmoor. He's a character, as we had mentioned, that was reintroduced into regular DC continuity through Ram V's story here. This is a very interesting character that Ram V found the perfect storyline to use him in. The character himself was originally created, I want to say the mid-90s, and was created by the one and only Warren Ellis.
Yes.
And had first appeared in Stormwatch number 37. However, according to the DC Wiki in the Prime Earth continuity, Jack Hawksmoor first appeared as part of the New 52 DC universe. So he was introduced in 2011, but it really didn't make any moves.
No.
And I actually read that issue. It was typical New 52 trying to introduce Wildstorm and Vertigo characters, and it just didn't work
because they tried to actually stick Martian Manhunter,
and they also tried to make him into a cape.
Yes.
And Jack Hawksmoor, I guess you could say, yes, he's part of Stormwatch, which is a bunch of capes, right, David? But it's more mature and grounded as opposed to the Justice League.
And their powers are based on very wide out there concepts.
It's very different.
It's very different.
It's very, very different.
It's very, like, the way I would explain it to people is like, if you look at Stormwatch, their powers and their personalities are very similar to, say, how you would view Doom Patrol. Their powers on Doom Patrol are
that's a good point.
Are out there concepts. Mm-hmm. Purely out there concepts.
It's quirky, it's outlandish.
Yes.
You scratch your head for a second and you're like, what the fuck? Okay, this works.
And suddenly it works. You know, you have the embodiment of a street in Doom Patrol.
Right.
Say, like, you know.
Which is, David, come on. On paper, that's a stupid idea.
It's a stupid idea.
It's stupid. If someone tried to pitch that to me, I'd be like, get the fuck out of here.
But then
it works.
It works. And if you look at this, Hawksmoor gets his powers by literally talking to the city.
Yes.
The personification of the city.
So let's get into that. So he was brought in officially right around, as I said, the same time many of the other former Image imprints like Wildstorm were brought into the so-called regular DC continuity. And this is, of course, if people aren't aware of this, because it's 2011 now, that's a long time ago. was the same time when Vertigo was brought in as well. So this is right when they tried to mainstream Constantine as well. But focusing on Jack Hawksmoor, I know I'm saying his name wrong, but it's okay. It's also a fake name. It doesn't make sense. It's not real. The character is perfect for Swamp Thing, as you have been reiterating throughout our discussion so far. He's perfect for a Swamp Thing story, as he is known as the King of Cities. He gains his power from a symbiotic link with the city he's in. The bigger it is, the bigger his powers are. In Ram V's story, he fleshed out the mythos a bit more, and even a little different than we've seen before, making him more of an embodiment of a city, which fell in line with the cosmology of Swamp Thing. He almost acts like an avatar of the city.
Yes.
As opposed to just simply a symbiotic link where he derives power from the size of the city.
From the size of the city.
Here now, which makes sense. I don't feel like this is a destruction of the character. If anything, it's maybe a deconstruction that recontextualizes our idea of this character and his abilities, and it's a matter of perspective. And Ram V switches the perspective on this character to where now suddenly he's viewed much like an avatar, which would make sense with the character regardless, and it makes sense within the world of Swamp Thing.
I think that's the thing that I would be very interested if Ram V continued on with Jack and basically further explained his connection to the city, the power
and how it works. Yeah,
because one of the things that was really cool about his character in the past, and when he was in Image Comics, his one weakness was if you took him out of the city, he'd slowly die.
So he couldn't be a country bumpkin?
Yeah, he couldn't go out to the country.
He can't go camping?
I kept thinking to myself, like when I was reading the issues, I'm going, okay, you have him with Swamp Thing, but if Swamp Thing teleports Jack outside of the city, Jack should actually start dying.
Well, maybe not dying, just not having power, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, that's why I was really interested to see how the story unfolds, how the two mesh, because unless Ram V is going to retcon the more kind of recontextualize Jack's power, how his powers work.
And I'm okay if he does.
Yeah. But like, if he were to take the original concept, which is if you take Jack out of his element, he starts slowly dying and decaying. Then all of a sudden, like, I'm like going, it'd be interesting seeing like Swamp Thing save him, and then suddenly Jack is dying because he's not in the city.
Yeah.
Swamp Thing would take him out and basically transport him maybe to like the jungle or like this forest. And that would be a death sentence for Jack.
Do you think, this is a stupid question, but do you think Ram V could do a damn good story for Jack?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially with his power base and what he's shown, what he's been able to do with Swamp Thing. It's very obvious that he can do these types of stories that are perfect for these type of characters.
I just like that Ram V is not going to the go-to toolbox and bringing out characters that we would expect to see, characters that are overused. How many times have we said this, David, that there are so many great DC characters that are probably C level, not because they suck. It's just because that's what they're C level and B level. They're just not used. They were only used as guest appearances here and there. And I would probably say Jack Hawksmoor is probably a C-level character. But that doesn't make him any less interesting. In fact, he could easily be promoted to, I would say, an A character, depending on the story and if he can be mainstreamed or not. But I do feel like Ram V could do a character like this justice, and it goes to show you Ram V's desire to do things that aren't being done. Because instead of going to that go-to toolbox, he's doing something entirely different than no one would have expected. I mean, who knows Jack's character really?
Oh yeah,
not a lot of people do.
Not a lot of people do, and I mean, like, I honestly think even our listeners are probably wondering who the freak is Jack Hawksmoor, and why does David know about him? Well, I read a lot of comics. So
you're the classical nerd.
I'm the classical omni geek nerd who reads whatever is in front of me.
I'm the classical person that likes to pretend I'm not a nerd, but we all know I really am.
And,
but
like-
I have an image to uphold, David.
Just to help explain to people why I do agree with you that in the right hands, a character like Jack could be literally raised to A tier levels, because in past stories, think about it like this. In one of his past stories, he was in Japan. Because he was able to connect to the city of Japan, he created a giant robot that he was able to control out of all the parts of the city,
Why a robot?
because it was Japan and it was
What
in
does that mean?
Tokyo.
I don't understand what that
in
means.
Tokyo.
That's kind of a racist storyline. You think what
It kind of is, but if you think of who's writing it was Warren Ellis.
That's kind of like saying, hey, you know what? Jack Hawksmoor is going to go to Mexico and he's going to create a giant burrito.
I'm just
monster.
saying. But basically, because he was in Japan, he was able to create a giant robot because of the culture around
I
him.
get it. I understand. I'm just being stupid.
And like, imagine that. Like, he's able to actually go into a city like Metropolis. God only knows what he's able to create
Yeah.
because he's in the city of Superman.
I think it would be interesting to see a storyline, at least a short event series, 6, 8 issues. I feel like Ram V can definitely do the trick. Now, bringing in this character did a few interesting things as well, besides the things we've already discussed, but it also neatly positioned this character and the Parliament of the Gears in a position that all makes sense, and it created almost like a tier system and different categories where you have the green, red, and rot on one side of the spectrum, and in their and then you have their respective avatars, and then on the other you have the inorganic collective consciousness of a city and its avatar, Jack Hawksmoor, and its contradictive codependence on industry, which has been given a consciousness and has its own avatar being the Pale Penguin.
Yes.
That is the cleverness of the final issue, of issue 13.
Yeah, when you put everything together and you see like
It
how
all
this-
just fits, David.
how the symbiotic relationship between everybody is.
It feels like a no-brainer. Like when you read it and you get to the end, like duh, like this. Obviously, this makes perfect sense.
This makes perfect
how
sense,
he
yeah.
wrote this story. So yeah, Ram V has taken aspects within the DC universe and given them more concrete purpose. I think that's a great way to sum up that entire aspect. Now, David, before we close out the show, we also have the reintroduction of Tifa Holland,
Yeah, we can't skip that.
also known as Sprout, which I'm glad they changed her name because that's a stupid name.
Hey, that you know what? It was cool and it was cute in the
That's why I don't like
in the
it.
earlier comics, because she was a Sprout from Swamp Thing
That's so
and
stupid.
and Kate Holland and Constantine.
So first, some background on the character.
Oh, yes.
Tifa
Yes.
Holland was created by Doug Wheeler and Pat Broderick. First appearing in Swamp Thing Volume 2,
Yes.
number 90. So her history goes way, way back. However, in the Prime Earth continuity, Tifa Holland first appeared as part of the New 52 during that whole time when they were trying to just reintroduce. It was when DC didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They're like, all right, guys, we don't know what we're doing. Let's bring everything together. It makes no sense, but let's do it.
When they were being experimental.
Yeah. And literally none of it worked.
It worked.
I want to say the only thing they were successful at doing is bringing Constantine into the mainstream. And I'm not saying his Constantine stories were good because they weren't that great. But they at least were able to bring a version of Constantine into the realm of the regular DC continuity. And now he can play and have bigger roles in certain storylines.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree with that?
100%.
I mean,
Looking back at the 52.
I would say that's the most successful element of the New 52.
Yeah. Because everything else got retconned with death metal.
Or it just fell away. Like they introduced the Phantom Stranger, gave him, kind of a weak story, but there were moments that were good, that were strong. What have they done with him since
What have they done with him since?
2013?
Yeah.
Nothing. They did the same thing with various other mystic characters in DC's vault, and they used them for maybe 6-7 issues in 2011 and 2012, and then never have returned.
Yeah. And if you think about it, the way they actually tried to reinvigorate the darker side of DC was to introduce Wonder Woman into Justice League Dark. So they didn't really.
Well, that was Rebirth.
Yeah, that was Rebirth. That's right.
But that's still considered DC New 52
New
continuity.
52 continuity.
Yeah.
And like when you really think about back in the New 52 and see, okay, did they have anything that stuck? Constantine's the only one.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing I could think of.
Justice League Dark.
They had some really great
Justice League
concepts.
Dark also came out of New 52.
Yeah, they had some really great concepts. I mean, my favorite DC 52 darker side of DC that they brought in was Dial H.
Mm-hmm.
Dial H was actually a really good series. Unfortunately, it was so out there concept that no one could understand it, but it was fun.
So, David, we had Tifa Holland being brought into
Yes.
the New 52 DC universe in Swamp Thing number 11. Or I'm sorry, let me backtrack. She was brought in to Prime Earth continuity. There we go.
There you go.
With her first appearance into what they are still calling the New 52 DC Universe continuity in the Swamp Thing number 11 by Ram V.
By Ram V, yes.
So she hasn't
been seen for a very long time.
seen since what, issue 90?
Yeah, because in all honesty, Tifa is a very, very powerful character.
Well,
when you think about it, she is the daughter of a natural avatar of the Green in Swamp Thing, and also the daughter of one of the most powerful magicians on the planet.
Yeah, so let's just explain that. So basically, Swamp Thing had a child, and in order for him to have a child, he basically possessed the body of Constantine, and then he had sex with
Abby Holland.
Yes. And then 9 months later, you have the love child of Constantine and Abby.
Of Tifa.
Yes, let's just call it what it is, Constantine's daughter. All Swamp Thing did was enjoy the sexual experience.
Wouldn't you, Mike? I mean, if you could jump into John Constantine's body,
I've
sorry.
already told you, David, that one of the best parts of the New 52 Justice League Dark in that first issue, which was actually really solid, was when Dead Man just jumped into random dudes and had sex with chicks.
Yes.
It's like, hell yeah, bro. Fucking douchey as fuck, but I can get behind it. I can get behind that. So yes, the storyline, ever since I was a kid, I'm like, oh yeah, I see what's going on here. And then this just brought back all those hormonal child-like thoughts. I was like, yes. It's a cuckold experience.
Exactly. And I was like I was cracking up when a long time ago, because it took me, when I read these 3 issues, I went back and read Tifa's run again, because I really liked that run on Swamp Thing, because it was supposed to be kind of like a passing of the torch.
Right.
Tifa was supposed to actually be the new Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
And it was an entire series of watching Tifa's growth to becoming the true avatar of the Green.
Well, wasn't she originally constructed to kill humanity?
Yes, because the Parliament went mad and basically felt that, just like what you said earlier, humanity is evil.
Yeah.
It destroys everything, so let's kill all of humanity off.
I'm there.
And Tifa was actually supposed to be the harbinger of destruction for humanity. Swamp Thing basically said, no, he's going to actually teach Tifa that humanity is actually good. And that's what would make her into the greatest avatar of the Green in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because, like, his whole goal in the series was to actually show that Tifa is going to be this good person. But he basically introduces her to pretty much the bad people in humanity. I mean, first and foremost, her biological father is John Constantine.
Yeah.
That's not exactly a really great example.
How dare
of
you,
humanity.
David? He's a David. You know what? I'm going to take what's the word? Umbrage. Is that the word? I've never used that word before. I feel special.
Let's be honest, Mike. Let's be honest.
David,
John Constantine is a fantastic character.
David, Jack Sparrow said it in the very first Pirates of the Caribbean film, and it's a genius. He's all, sometimes, honestly, you can trust. Wait, what does he say? Hold on, let me look it up, because it's one of the most greatest lines of all time, and you can actually connect it to Constantine.
To Constantine, yeah. I know what you're talking about, but yeah, go ahead and find it, because, yeah.
Oh, you can talk still. I don't want dead
Oh,
silence here.
But
Okay, here it is. He's all, me, I'm dishonest. And a dishonest man, you can always trust to be dishonest. Honestly, it's the honest ones you want to watch out for because you never can predict what they'll do. And
Yes.
that is the truest fucking
is
statement ever.
And if you think about
And you
it,
can connect that to Constantine, dude.
Easily.
There is truth in his dishonesty. And if you're an
easily.
idiot and fall for his lies, then that's on you.
Yeah.
Because he's essentially telling you what he's not going to do, why he's shaking his head yes and no.
and if you think about it, when you think about that statement in regards to Constantine and Swamp Thing is a good person. He's an honest man.
Yeah.
Alec Holland is an honest
He's too
man.
good.
He's too good. He believes in the good of humanity to the umpteenth. And it is scary what Swamp Thing might do because of being a good man. So yeah, you could say that, but still, I still say it's Constantine as an example of humanity. That is not a glowing thing. But like,
I still disagree, Dave.
and that whole story with Tifa though is amazing, and it actually during that whole time you saw like a lot of Swamp Thing fans gravitate towards Tifa, and a lot of them were like accepting of that character taking the mantle of Swamp Thing at the end, and then DC 52 came along, and then they retconned everything, and everyone was like, "Well, what about Tifa Holland?" Well, they never brought her back.
Yeah, until now, Dave.
Now.
And I know DC never gives us what we want. I consider myself lucky that we've even been given, such a great Swamp Thing storyline for the last, year and a half or so. But we're never given things that are good as fans of the darker side of DC, the mystical side of DC. We're not. We're continually shit on, and I would like, David, for them to actually give us a Tifa Holland storyline. I want Ram V to write it.
Yes.
I didn't think I would want this. By the end of Swamp Thing, I was like, no, give us more Swamp Thing. And I would like to see more Swamp Thing eventually. But if we take a break from the Swamp Thing storyline for a bit, which I believe they are, and then they give us like a Jack Hawksmoor story or a Tifa Holland story has to be written by Ram V, at least started by him. I would love that because that would be something new rather than going back to the same old storylines and characters that we use continually over and over and over.
Oh, and don't
It'd
forget,
be fresh territory.
This also makes Tifa awesome too, is the fact she's part demon, because I forgot.
Oh, it's Constantine's demon blood, right?
No. It wasn't Constantine's demon blood. It was Nurgle's blood that was in Constantine at the same time as Swamp Thing. So when
So basically he passed it, a demon STD.
A demon STD,
What a
basically.
sicko.
And that came from John Constantine.
I'd still take him. I'm not gay. I'm like, it's so stupid. David, if it was the reverse and Abby Holland possessed Constantine and Constantine had to fuck Swamp Thing in order to have a daughter, is that gay? It isn't, because Swamp Thing is a plant.
He's a plant.
And Abby Holland's consciousness is a lady.
And if Abby took possession of Swamp Thing, then she could just turn herself into female.
Not that any of this matters to you, but I mean, to me, I like to play the straight man role. Okay.
You don't want to go into the territory that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah. Okay, Dave, this does bring us to the end of our discussion. I feel like we covered the main points, although we have left out all of the poetic nuance.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover in this.
I feel like we could have had a 50-minute discussion on each issue.
Yes.
But again, we just don't have the time. Okay, David, so give me your final thoughts as well as your overall RMD score.
Now, overall RMD score for the 3 titles or individual titles? Because I have
all
both.
3. Just combine them, all 3.
All combined, it's a 98.
Okay.
It's a 98. I think it's a very strong start to his quote unquote second season, and I'm really excited to see where Ram V goes, especially in the very end, when the thing that just dawned on me, especially at the end of issue 3, Ram V brings in characters that fit his story, and he basically lays the breadcrumbs down so that when he introduces them, it's not like a complete surprise and you're like left going, well, what the hell why is that character there?
And also, you don't have to go back to it immediately.
Exactly. And like the fact that, at the end of this third issue, spoiler alert, Green Lantern shows up
Yeah.
and basically tells Swamp Thing, I need your help because there is a war coming, and it's a plant war from space.
You make it sound so stupid. A plant
It
war.
does sound stupid, Mike. It does. But when you think about it with how his story goes, it's really cool that basically Ram V is trying to say that the universe of Swamp Thing transcends Earth.
Yeah.
Because
I think that's-
the war of the natural versus unnatural transcends Earth.
Have
It
we
goes
done this
into
before?
space.
Have we seen Ram?
No.
Yes.
This is very, very...
We've never seen Swamp Thing do that. Yeah, I didn't think so.
It's very dicey territory because Swamp Thing has always been tied to Earth.
But this is Ram V trying
V.
to do something unique while also staying in the confines of who Swamp Thing is.
Yes.
And I'm a little hesitant going into these final 3 issues of Ram V's run. I should have full confidence in Ram V at this point, and I guess I can say I do. However, I don't like Green Lantern. I know that's blasphemy to so many DC fans, and there's probably fans now throwing their headphones and saying, how dare you? I'm not a big... I love DC Comics, but I'm also over the top tier characters. I feel like they have been so overused with the same recycled stories over and over and over, and because they don't have the mature themes that they can resort to at times, where they can tell more grounded stories, it leaves them in an area that's hard for them to shimmy and shake out of, if that makes sense.
No,
Like
it makes
you can
sense.
always tell where a Batman story is going to go. You can always tell where a Superman story is going to go because there's certain guiding themes that will always have to be there for those types of characters. Whereas characters on the darker side of DC, like Constantine, like Swamp Thing, just to name 2, let's just say the Justice League Dark characters as a whole, because there aren't those rules of no-nos that you can't do, I feel like there's so much more room to breathe with these certain characters. So that being said, I'm just not a big fan of Green Lantern. So I kind of groaned, but then I got quickly over it because I saw those flying plants in space and the fact that they were going to keep it grounded and connected to Swamp Thing. I was like, okay, well then, you know what? I'm going to give Ram V a chance because Ram V has not steered us wrong yet, has he?
No, and especially since he laid the groundwork to bring in these characters now. Especially, I like the little. He didn't have to make a big deal about it. He just basically said, "Hey, a friend of mine in Gotham saw you. Said that you would probably be the best person."
Who's
to
that friend?
Exactly.
Fuck that.
But here was the thing. I enjoy that because it made sense now why Ram V would throw in that one little panel of Batman seeing the tree. So now Batman knows, so, okay, I'm going to use that as a connection.
Yeah.
And if he does stuff like that, I'm okay with it.
Should have
You
been.
don't have to bring in the...
Should have been Constantine. Should have been. Hey,
should have been Constantine.
It just Batman.
But Batman has a bigger outreach.
Fuck him. Tell him to go cry in an alley. Okay, so I am gonna give this story a 97%. So we're very close. I mean, what more could be said?
It's a very good title, dude.
It's so good. The art by Mike Perkins is near perfect. His style meshes so well with Ram's poetics. What more can you say? It's just so good.
Yeah. It makes me... honestly,
we don't deserve Ram V. David, we and comic book fans don't deserve Ram V, especially if you go to social media and see some of the trolls lately that have attacked Ram V, saying that he is too abstract and that he doesn't make sense and that he's not a good writer. I'm like, well, how about let's flip the mirror on you, trolls. It's not that he is too abstract and his ideas are too hard to understand. It's you're not smart enough.
Wow, you did what I usually
I don't give
did.
a fuck. I will be an elitist when it comes to writing. And listen, I do not criticize people for having their tastes at all.
But I do.
But when you are no, if you like certain things that I don't like, I'm not going to judge you on that. That's you're well within your right not to like things. But when you attack a writer because his writing, this is how I'm going to interpret it. Because his writing is too fucking good for comic books. And I hate saying that because I don't want to undermine my love for comic books. But I'm also very picky and very I'm very judgmental very choosy with what I read because there's a lot of shit there. The shit to good ratio is very uneven when it comes to comic books. For the most part, a lot of them are garbage, and there are a few gold nuggets within in an entire year of comics that are being published. And I'm talking about DC. There's tons of stuff in the indie side that's fucking top notch. But when it comes to DC and Marvel, there's only a few gold nuggets in an entire year that you can point to and say, that is fucking intellectual as fuck.
Yeah.
And Ram V's Swamp Thing title is that title this year.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And last year.
Like, the one thing that, if my stance on writing nowadays in comics is a lot of people, one of my pet peeves nowadays is a lot of people say comics should be simple media. Meaning it's just candy for my brain.
It can be a lot. It can be
Escapism.
It can be escapist fare,
Right?
but it can also be relevant.
And people always tell me when people who write too good for a title are trying to be like Alan Moore back in the day and be like, Frank Miller and all them that basically broke out graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. We shouldn't shun them. We should actually encourage writers like that.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, when you get simple writing, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for this.
Simple writing is okay, Dave. It's not bad.
When you get simple writing, you get writers like Tom Taylor's Deceased.
But that's good though.
You get death metal.
Oh,
You get death metal.
death metal's garbage, but
And-
the first run of metal was good.
Yeah, but it's still simple writing. It's blockbuster.
Scott Snyder likes to talk a lot.
It's
but it's
Michael-
still simple.
It's Michael Bay. It's Michael Bay flashes.
Yeah, Tom Taylor does just fine with certain titles. I
does.
know I talk a lot of shit about him, but he does just fine. It's become a bit of a joke now, and that's why we continue to talk shit about him. But he does just fine. Deceased was fucking fun, so I'm not against fun. I read Superman titles as well, which for the most part is mostly escapist entertainment. There's nothing wrong with that. And just like there's nothing wrong with that, there's nothing wrong with a highly intellectual piece from Ram V and Cy Spurrier. There's room for both.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all I'm saying. Don't criticize the man because the dude is fucking smart.
Absolutely.
It gets me mad. I don't get angry with social media anymore, David. I don't. I'm over it. But I'm just minding my business on Twitter, looking for some Hellblazer stuff and talking to people. And suddenly I see Ram V justifying himself. I'm like, why are you justifying yourself? So then I read the thread, and he actually posts the criticism. And he then tries to explain, and that is one point against Ram V. I feel like an artist should have a continual or perpetual middle finger up.
Absolutely.
You never explain your art.
No.
Don't explain your art.
Don't explain it.
Your art speaks for itself. But also, Ram V is a younger gentleman, I believe. And I understand sometimes emotions get the best of you, and you want to fucking say, listen, guys, I'm a smart motherfucker. You better recognize this shit. And listen, I might do the same thing if I was Ram V, if I was being honest. If I knew I was writing some exceptional shit, and then I see some fucking useless assholes complaining, I might be tempted to start bitching at them too. Can you imagine, David?
You would gladly jump into Ram V's body and basically do that.
Yes.
Do you know who I am?
All right, let's bring our show to an end, not to the end, but to an end, because there will be more shows, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we'll be back very soon with a new House of Mystery. Thank you, David.
Thank you.